Deployment Site Coordinators, thank you so much for volunteering in this special way for the 2018 Homeless Count. My name is Jonathan and I work here at LAHSA, and we're going to go through Deployment Site Coordinator training. Alright, to start off with, there's a lot of supplies that are needed for your deployment site, and you're going to get them at your in-person training. But we're going to go through each of them in just a second. But what you're first going to get is a cardboard box, and you're going to get a plastic box of supplies. On the top of your cardboard box is going to be a list of all the supplies in both, and we're going to go through those individually one by one. Okay, for your cardboard box, if you open it up, depending on the size of your deployment site, what you're going to get is a box filled with clipboards with tally sheets on the front, and then the corresponding census tract map on the back. We're going to talk about how to organize these a little bit later in the video. Alright, now let's go through what's in this plastic box, because there's a lot of things in here that you're going to need. So one of the things that you're going to get is a rolled up map of the area that you're going to cover. You're going to want to find room on the wall that's a central place where everyone can look at the area that they're going to be covering that night. This year, you're going to get a t-shirt for yourself and your assistant as well. So make sure to wear these so that you're visible for all the volunteers that show up. Make sure to email your regional coordinator so that you get the right size. For driving census tracts, we have card magnets to put on cars so that you can signify that you're volunteering for the homeless count. For walking census tracts and walking teams, you'll have safety vests to wear while you're out counting. We also have flashlights. Flashlights are for lighting your path and for tally sheets, not for shining them in people's faces or in tents or vehicles. You'll have 2-on-1 cards for people if they need resources, and depending on the spa that you're in, you'll also have spa-specific referral cards as well. Pencils for tally sheets, Sharpies for certificates of appreciation to fill out for your volunteers, pens to fill other forms out that we'll get to in a second. You're going to get 2 manila envelopes to put forms in at the end of the night, and we have tape to tape up directional signs. And then you're going to get a media awareness sign letting people know that photos may be taken at the event. Hang the sign up in a place where everyone can see it. The other thing that's going to be in your plastic box is a whole bunch of forms that we're going to go over right now. So this green form is a form that takes you through the run schedule for your homeless count. Read the first page of just general instructions, and on the back it gives a timeline of an order of events to help guide you for your homeless count. For volunteer training, you're going to get quizzes. You're going to get a big stack of volunteer training quizzes with fill in the blanks, and you'll know that because there'll be a bunch of blanks. And then there's one for you as an answer key with the answers filled in. Make sure to hand these out to volunteers when they arrive. The next form is a team sign-up sheet. You're going to use these when you're creating teams. You're going to get a stack of waiver of liability forms. On one side it's going to be for adults, and on the other side it's going to be for volunteers that are the age of 14 to 17 to fill out. No matter what age you are, you need to fill a waiver of liability form out in order to volunteer. This is mandatory. This form is a list of all of the census tracts that your deployment site is going to be covering. This helps you track at the end of the night to make sure that all of your census tracts are accounted for. Hopefully you've already filled this out before the time of your training, but this is just a receipt to acknowledge that you got a $25 Visa gift card to help out with your snacks. For deployment sites with a security guard, there is a tracking sheet that you can fill out when applicable. You're going to get a stack of certificates of appreciation for all of your volunteers to show that we appreciate them. Directional signs to show where your deployment site is and also where the restroom is. So those are all the supplies that you're going to be receiving. Remember, you have a checklist of supplies, so make sure you go through it, and if you're missing anything, let your regional coordinator know. Up next, we're going to talk about setting up the different stations in your deployment site and then walking through the night. Okay, so for the first thing you want to do is you're going to want to recruit a couple assistants to help you out for the night. And we're going to go through on how to set up your deployment site. Okay, so for the first thing that you're going to want to do to set up is you're going to want to set up a sign-in or a welcome table. And there's going to be 3 things that you're going to want to put on that. The first one is an optional sign-in. Some people like this because you can see all the volunteers at a quick glance. So there's pros and cons to this. The pros is you can see everyone that signed up really quickly, but the con is it could create a bottleneck for people when they first arrive at the deployment site. The next thing that you're going to give them is a waiver of liability form to hold on to, because remember you have to sign this to volunteer. And then you're going to give them a copy of their volunteer training quiz. Once they have these 2 forms, you can invite them over to the area that you have set up for the snacks. The second area that we mentioned is a snack area. So this is where like fare or snacks can be arranged depending on your deployment site and however fashion that you would like. The next area that you're going to want to set up is a training area. You want to set up so that there are enough chairs for your volunteers and that your audio and video equipment is up and ready and tested before volunteers show up so that they can hear and see the training video adequately. So now that you've got your training area set up, volunteers will be coming in and they'll be getting snacks. But once you've seen that the majority of your volunteers have arrived, you're going to make an announcement that volunteer training is going to begin soon, and that they should start gathering at their volunteer area to get their seats with their quizzes so that training can begin. Once the training video is done, go over the quiz with your volunteers. Ask for audience participation to see who gets the right answers. Make sure to use your answer key that's given to you in the supply box so that you have the right answers. Make sure to give time for people to ask questions. The other area that you're going to want to set up before volunteers arrive is your deployment area. Your deployment area is going to have safety vests for your walking census tract teams, card magnets for your driving census tract teams, your flashlights, and then your clipboards that have your tally sheets and census tract maps on them as well. And finally, an overview map of the area that you'll be counting. So every deployment site is different, and it's going to be located in different places. Restrooms are going to be located in different places. So we've provided directional signs for you. So if you need to show volunteers where to get into the deployment site area, you can use the homeless count signs on the one side of the directional signage that we've given you. Or for restrooms, if that's tricky to find, then you can use the other side where to indicate the restrooms can be found. Let's talk about your census tracts and maps really quick. What I suggest doing is dividing them up into 2 different groups: driving census tracts and walking census tracts. That's the first part of dividing your census tracts up. The second part is making sure that they go in order with the neighboring census tract in that area. This will be helpful if you need to assign multiple census tracts to one team. That way, you'll give them neighboring census tracts as opposed to a census tract on the other side of the area that you're counting. After the training is done, then it becomes time for the organizing of teams and then deploying them out. So I want to give some advice and some things that we've learned over the years on how to do that effectively. The first thing that you're going to want to do beforehand is you're going to want to know the total number of census tracts that you're going to need to count. That way, you can compare that to the number of volunteers that you have. So a good thing to do is either count the number of volunteers during the training or have one of your assistants count them, or use your sign-in sheet that they use to sign in at the beginning of the night. And then depending on the number of volunteers you have, you can start to divide up teams and census tracts accordingly. Let me give you some scenarios real quick about if you don't have enough volunteers as maybe you were expecting. So there's a couple things that you can do. Number one, you can minimize the number of people on a team. So you have to have at least 2 people on every team. No one can go count alone. But you can maximize your volunteers and team and coverage if you break teams down into teams of 2. So that's one thing that you can do. The second thing that you can do is you can give teams multiple census tracts. You want to make sure that if you do this, that you give them the multiple census tracts at the beginning of the night before they go out and deploy. It's much harder for teams to go out and count and then come back to the deployment site to get another census tract to go count again. So that's why it's really, really important to know the number of census tracts that need to be covered, and then also put your census tracts together that are neighboring each other so that you can deploy people quickly. Let's talk about the scenario of if you have too many volunteers. Good for you. The first thing that you're going to want to do is you can maximize the number of teams to, I would say 4, I would say 5 max is probably the most on one team. So you can make teams larger and give them 1 census tract each. That's the first thing that you can do. The second thing that you can do is you can see if volunteers want to hang back and help out at the deployment site, because there's plenty of things to do while teams are out counting. And then the third thing that you can do is, if you still have too many volunteers, is call your regional coordinator and see if volunteers are willing to go to other areas where maybe volunteer participation is lower. Okay, so once volunteers have been trained and all their questions have been answered, they're ready to get organized and go out and start counting. So, just like you've divided up your census tracts into walking census tracts and driving census tracts, you're going to do the same thing with your volunteers. You're going to divide your volunteers up by walking teams and by driving teams. So you never know who's going to volunteer for your count until they actually show up. So let me give you some practical tips on how to divide your teams up. The first thing that you're going to want to do is really utilize the space. And so what I do is I say, how many people are willing to be on driving teams and driving census tracts? And you should know the number of driving census tracts ahead of time. So you can say, we have 15 census tracts that we need to have people drive in. So who's willing to be a driver? And then you have people go to that side of the room. Then I do the same thing with walking census tract teams. How many people would like to be on a walking team? And so with those people, I would like for you to go to this side of the room so that it's clear who's driving and who's walking. Now that you've divided your volunteers up into driving census tract teams and walking census tract teams, you want to divide them up equally into the adequate amount of teams as possible, depending on your volunteer turnout. So your teams may be smaller or larger, depending. Remember, the goal is to count all of your census tracts that night. So you want to plan and adjust accordingly. So let's say that you've concluded in total you have 10 teams. So what you're going to do is have your assistants or yourself hand out these team sign-up sheets. Before you hand them out, if you have 10 teams, for example, you're going to mark a number for that team number 1 through 10 because you have 10 teams. Your assistants or yourself are going to hand out one of these sheets per team and explain to them that you would like for them to fill out the top portion of this form and then wait until their team number is called to be deployed. Once everyone has gotten a sheet and they begin to fill them out, when you and your team are ready, teams will be called by their number and they will hand this back to you so that you can fill in the bottom portion. The bottom portion of the form is where you will indicate which census tracts they will be counting. You can find that on your census tract tally sheet and census tract number. The final thing that you're going to do is you're going to indicate the time that they left and then the time that they return. These sheets are very, very important for you to track your teams, where they are and how long they've been out counting. So you want to make sure that you don't lose these. Okay, so like we were saying, teams have been divided up and they are filling out their team sign-up sheet. Once their number has been called, or their team number has been called, they're going to walk up with 2 things. They're going to walk up with their filled out sign-up team sheet and their volunteer waiver form. They need to turn both of these things in so that they get the materials needed. and this is very important that they do this. Your deployment site coordinator assistant or yourself will verify that this information is correct, and then once they have and they got their waiver form, then they'll get all of the materials needed. Their census tracts with their maps, their vests if they're walking census tract teams, flashlights, and then card magnets for driving teams. Now that your teams have all been deployed, there's a lot of things to do while they're out counting, and so we're going to go over those activities with you now. Fill out certificates of appreciation with all of your volunteers' names. Use your team sign-up sheet to make sure that you spell everyone's name right and that they all get a certificate to show that they volunteered for the homeless count. The other thing that you're going to want to do is track your volunteers. So you're going to do that by using your team sign-in sheets again, where they'll have their names and cell phone numbers. So you can see the census tracts that they're counting by they're written down, but then also by using the map to see where they are. After about an hour, you're going to start checking in with teams to make sure that they're okay. You can also start cleaning up, and your assistants can help. You can do that by breaking down the snack table or the light fare that you provided, the training area if you set up chairs or tables, and the projector or whatever you use to show the training video, so that the deployment site is starting to get cleaned up and you're ready to go, so that when teams come back, you can end your night as quick as possible. Now let's talk about when teams start coming back from counting and all the things that need to happen to finish the night out. The 2 manila envelopes are going to be important for you to use now that teams start coming back. The first manila envelope, you're going to put in all of your waiver forms that everyone signed, your team sign-in sheets once they've come back and that they've been accounted for, and then also either your security form or any of the other forms that people fill out. You're going to put in this manila envelope. Once all your teams are accounted for and they've come back, you're going to seal it up and you're going to put it back with your supplies that are going to come back to LAHSA. Your second manila folder is going to be for just your tally sheets and your census tract maps. So no matter if they were all counted, if they were entered in digitally, or if they were partially counted or not counted at all, it doesn't matter. We just want you to put all of your census tracts and your tally sheets back in here. Make sure to use this, the census tracking sheet to indicate, this is where you indicate whether areas were counted completely, partially, or not at all. This also helps make sure that as you put them in to your manila folder, you check them off to make sure that all of your census tracts get put in here. And this is really, really important that all your census tracts are accounted for. So, now that you start to get your census tracts and your tally sheets back, you're going to send your tally sheets to your tally sheet validator or your assistant who is acting as your tally sheet validator. They're going to do a couple things. They're going to look at the tally sheet and make sure that nothing looks odd or off and make sure that everything is marked clearly. If they do have any questions, they're going to ask the teams right there before they go. And then if everything looks okay, they're going to start inputting that information that they found that night of into the digital online form that will be provided for you the night of or the day of your count. Make sure that you mark the time that teams return and then mark here, and then you're going to take that and put it in your manila folder as teams return. Once again, once all of your census tracts have been turned in, you're going to make sure to put them in your manila folder, and then you're going to check off the census tract to ensure that it got put in the manila folder so that all of the census tracts are accounted for. At the very end of the night, when all of your teams have come back and they're accounted for, you're going to want to take both of your manila envelopes, make sure that all of the forms are put in this folder, all of your census tracts and maps are put into this folder. You're going to seal them up and you're going to put them in your supplies to return back to LAHSA. Okay, all of your teams are back, they've counted and they've returned safely. Your tally sheets have been checked and they've been entered in digitally. You put all of your forms in the manila envelope and all of the tally sheets and census tracts into the other manila envelope. You've cleaned your deployment site up, your snack area, your training area. that pretty much takes care of most of the things, but there's a couple more things that we want to make sure that you do. To finish your count, you're going to refer back to your trusty checklist to look at all of the supplies that need to be returned back to LAHSA. The supplies that need to be returned will be indicated in bold, capitalized red to make it clear that that's what needs to come back to LAHSA. You're going to take all of those materials and you're going to put them in the box for either a LAHSA staff person to come and pick them up and return them to LAHSA. Thank you so much. Or there may be other arrangements that you've made with your regional coordinator, and so just follow those instructions accordingly. Thanks so much. We really appreciate the hard work and the time that you've put into this, and thank you for volunteering in this specific role for the homeless count. We literally could not do this without you. So that concludes our deployment site coordinator training. Thank you so much for the time that you put into this and for volunteering in this great effort. We literally couldn't do this without you. And the last thing that we want to say is, have a great count!